Dear Sэл, can you explain to our viewers about future of channelers? Does everyone needs to be channeler, and how you can decide what you need to do living here on Earth?
Well, first of all, every human being on Earth is a channel of the higher self. And some channels that are publicly giving forth messages and claiming that their messages are coming from some particular entity or group, some of them are merely channeling their own higher self. And that's okay. I'm not saying that it's totally honest to claim that it's someone else besides your higher self, but generally, if you're channeling your own higher self, you're getting fairly accurate, higher dimensional information, because the higher self, by my definition, is levels 7 through 12 of our being. If you've read the soul integration material, or I certainly encourage the listeners to read soul integration, it goes into great depth about the levels and dimensions of ourselves. We have 6 lower bodies and 6 higher bodies. And the 6 higher bodies are collectively referred to as the higher self. The lowest level of the 6 higher bodies is the soul. The soul is level 7 of our being. And then we have the oversoul, the monad, and then 3 more universal levels. And those together are the higher self, which is in essence who we really are. We're not just these 6 lower bodies, the physical, emotional, and mental, which are the gross bodies, and then the subtle bodies, the astral, etheric, and causal. Those are the 6 lower bodies that we typically identify with and often become stuck in. We become overly identified with our lower bodies, and then the ego, which operates the 3 dense bodies, the physical, emotional, and mental, and we become caught in the ego perspective, and then it seems that we cannot hear the messages from our higher self. So most everybody, I say most, but we'll say everybody at some time or another has channeled the higher self. Maybe they didn't know what they were doing, and maybe it only came through for a few seconds before the ego took over again and started distorting the messages. But everyone at one time or another has felt inspired. And when you feel inspired, it's usually a connection to the higher self, which is directly connected to the Godhead. There are 2 aspects of God. There is everything that is, which is part of God. And then there is the Godhead, or the source of everything that is. And they're not exactly the same. I mean, in a way, the Godhead could be thought of as a subset of everything that is. But the Godhead is radiating pure unconditional love continuously, 24/7, nonstop. In order to fully understand what channeling the higher self means, it's kind of necessary to have some of this background information.
I would like to ask, what about your attitude to karma and relationships during life on Earth? What about connections, and is it your karma to be a channeler, or is it your decision?
Well, you could say it's a little of both. I think I would call it dharma more than karma. Karma is unfinished soul business, unfinished soul lessons that you may have with other souls. Dharma is more like your purpose and mission, your service to humanity. So I would say that my channeling work is a service to humanity. It's why one of the main reasons I came to Earth, to share information from higher dimensions, whether it's through my higher self or through the founders or my other spirit guides. And karma would be more, what did I not complete in my past lives that I want to complete in this life? And a good example of that would be unconditional love. Maybe my soul started learning about unconditional love 10 lifetimes ago, and it's taken until this lifetime to feel as though now I truly understand what unconditional love is and am able to express it. So basically the karma would be to complete the soul lesson of unconditional love. And the Dharma would be to express unconditional love to people to help lift them. So they're very similar words with very similar meanings at times, and at other times they're very different. So I would say it's both my karma and my dharma to be bringing forth information from higher dimensions.
So if we are talking about timeline healing, how is it from the point of timelessness? There is no time in spirit world. How you can describe it?
That's the whole reason timeline healing exists, is that ultimately all time is now. There is no past, present, and future in the ultimate sense, although in these lower dimensions there seems to be time and space, and it seems to be useful to have clocks and calendars and what we call possible and probable timelines, which is part of the quantum universe. Time existing like a bubble contained within the realm of timelessness. And so if you're in the timeless realms, you can see the past, present, and future of the realms of time and space. And because of free will, there are essentially an infinite number of possible and probable realities existing within this bubble of time and space. For example, and I do this in my workshops, in the next moment, I could choose from a nearly infinite variety of things to do. I could pick up the recorder and set it down. I could pick up the drink. I could take a drink or not take a drink. I could move a pen or a telephone, or I could stand up or sit down. There's nearly an infinite number of things I could do in the next moment. As soon as I set my intention, I'm going to pick up the recorder, then that becomes part of the dominant timeline. In the dominant timeline, he picked up the recorder. So up until you make a commitment to take an action, things remain in a state of possibility or probability. In this case, picking up the recorder was part of a probable reality, because it was likely that at some point I would pick up the recorder, whether it's to turn it off or move it or whatever. Whereas jumping out the window might be a possible reality, but probably one I would not choose to do unless I want to hurt my body. So there's an infinite number of possible and probable realities. And in physics, we call those the wave form of probabilities. It's the wave nature of time and space. And as soon as a decision is made, I'm going to pick up the recorder, now that waveform of possibilities and probabilities has collapsed into the particle state, which is there's a distinct time and place where the recorder is. It could have been in any one of a number of different places until I chose to put it in front of me like that.
It's a complicated question. I don't understand. And when you go in higher dimension, it's easier to see,
Yes.
but it's hardly to say.
Yes, there's a great analogy, and this is my favorite analogy. You're on a path walking through a thick forest, and you can only see one turn of the path in front of you where you're going, and you can only see one turn of the path behind you where you've been. But you find the tallest tree in the forest, and you climb to the very top of that tree, and you look out on the entire forest, and you can see down below you the path that you've been walking on. You can see way back into the past of the path, and you can see way up into the future of the path where you're going next. Not only that, you can see all the other possible paths through the forest from your vantage point. So when you're in your higher self, it's like being in the top tree in the forest, where you can just look out over all the possible and probable choices that can be made using free will. And from that place, you can predict with some degree of accuracy which choices are most likely to be made by humanity. This is why we're able to predict with 80 to 90% accuracy what's going to happen with humanity, because of this ability to simultaneously see the consciousness of the different members of humanity. For example, right now, about 3/4 of humanity are dominated by fear. And so 3/4 of the manifestations on Earth are going to be fear-based, such as viruses, war, economic collapses, struggle and strife, domestic violence, child and prostitution, kidnapping. Pick the worst things of society, and those are outpicturings of fear, which is a dominant state of consciousness on Earth. You walk down the street in a big city, 3 out of 4 people are dominated by fear, whether they're aware of it or not. And most of them are not aware that they're dominated by fear. They just go along with whatever the television tells them to do, or whatever the so-called leaders tell them to do. But they have this fear of stepping out of the matrix, of stepping out of their limited way of thinking.
What is happening with coronavirus right now? Is it a massive reprogramming of bodies, or do you have your own vision on this main topic of the world?
Well, through a combination of physical research and guidance from my guides, I've been able to piece together what I believe is a fairly accurate picture of this virus, but it is actually a complex question. So there is a family of viruses which are called coronavirus. The one which they're called CB19 is referring specifically to one of the coronaviruses that often triggers viral pneumonia in older people who have pre-existing conditions. And 40% of all the people who have died from this virus are over the age of 80. And 80% of the people who've died from this virus have had pre-existing conditions. It's actually more than 80%, but we're being somewhat generous with our numbers here. Also, the number of people who have died from the virus is grossly overstated. Worldwide, it's approximately 300,000 souls have died from this virus. Now, many, many more have died with the virus, not being the primary cause of death, maybe being somewhat of a contributing factor. So first of all, the death rate worldwide among the entire population is approximately 0.03%. And among those who test positive, it's about 0.2%. So it is being treated as though it were a black plague that kills 40% of the population, when in reality, all you have to do is the math. 300,000 divided into 7.8 billion approximately, and you'll get numbers that I've rounded off, of course. So it is being misreported. It is being misunderstood. Some people say wear a mask. Others say don't wear a mask. Nobody seems to know for sure whether people should be wearing masks or not. Nobody knows whether you should be 2 meters apart or not. But somebody's giving orders to the various government agencies to enforce this idea of remaining 2 meters apart and things like this, and wearing masks in shops and so on. So it's a very complex and confusing question, but the main thing, there are 2 main points about this. Number one is letting go of fear, looking objectively at what is happening without going into fear. And number 2 is boosting your immune system using, well, basically things that are in my drink here. This drink has just about every immune system booster you can imagine in it. And in addition, I take vitamin D3 with K2, and I take zinc and these vitamin C. So these are things that boost your immune system and greatly reduce your chances of catching the virus. Now, the bigger issue here, I mentioned fear, which is a huge issue, but the bigger issue here is the oppression by various government agencies and entities telling you, you must do this, you must do that. You can't travel unless you have this, or basic restrictions on travel and things of this nature. So, and then of course, when people cannot open their shops because they're told they have to close their shops, then it affects the economy. And as a result, millions of people lose their businesses, lose their work, and it creates an economic calamity, which is totally unnecessary. And then the suppression of treatments of the virus. There is a very effective treatment. It's about 93% effective. It's called hydroxychloroquine plus azithromycin and zinc. It is a well-known remedy. There are thousands of doctors who are using it, but there are hundreds of thousands who are not using it because they have been brainwashed through government propaganda that it doesn't work. And the reason for that is because there's very little money to be made in using that remedy. The drug companies want to push expensive vaccines and other remedies in order to clear this virus. Whereas if everyone who had even the slightest symptom of the disease had taken this remedy right at the very beginning, the side effects are minimal, almost no side effects. It's inexpensive, about 20 cents a dose or $6 per regimen. And the virus would be gone. It would have been gone by June if this regimen had started in March. But of course, there are other factors. There's political factors. It's used as a control mechanism to keep people controlled.